Coming up, I'm going to tell you why AJ Dybantsa has re-entered the number one overall pick picture. That's coming up next.
You are Locked On NBA Draft with no ceilings. Your daily podcast on the future stars of the NBA. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, Draft Sickos? My name's Corey Tulaba. Welcome to the Locked On NBA Draft Podcast with no ceilings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right. I am recording morning after the Jimmy V Classic. Nathan and Maxwell previewed it yesterday. Nathan and I were at Madison Square Garden in person live to get up close eyes on a number of 2026 NBA draft prospects. Nathan was supposed to be on this podcast with me, but we were having some technical difficulties, so I am rocking solo today. And let's first, before we get into the overall big picture of AJ Dybantsa and his draft stock, let's talk about his game. BYU played Clemson in the opener at the Jimmy V Classic. So we made sure we got there early, got on the floor, watched AJ work out, get his pregame reps in. His body, looks fantastic. He's huge. The kid works up a sweat in warmups. He's doing what he's supposed to be doing. And then the bright lights of Madison Square Garden. I mean, you ask a ton of players throughout basketball history, where is the number one place that they want to play one singular game? And it's Madison Square Garden, because there's just a vibe, there's an energy. Now, with that said, for these double headers, if you haven't attended them, they do tend to get a little wonky as far as fan support. I mean, for one, BYU, Clemson, a long way from New York City. Still, a number of fans did show up, but the arena was pretty empty. And so there wasn't that crazy MSG energy coming into this game. And so the first half, Dybantsa, honestly, I thought he played well in the first half. Like, he was good. He came out, he hit his first three, but he was quiet. And really, the entire BYU team just felt like they just didn't have any energy at all throughout the entirety of the game. They felt like they needed something to spark them to get on some kind of run. And that didn't happen. They were down big in the first half. And that's when, I tweeted, I said, hey, AJ has got to get it going like he did in the UConn game. If BYU is going to have a chance. They were down 20 plus. And that's exactly what happened, folks. If you have not watched BYU versus Clemson, either go back, try to find a replay of the game, or at least go through the highlights, because we saw AJ Dybantsa, the guy that has been hyped up as the potential number one guy in his class for all these years. That dude came out in the second half. He had 22 points, I believe, or 23 points in the game in the second half alone. But the thing that had impressed me most, we know about the scoring, and he did it in a number of ways. He was unbelievably effective and almost unstoppable getting downhill. He got to the free throw line a ton, just very physical player, drawing contact. But you saw the self-creation ability. You saw his ability to slow things down and operate out of the mid-range and get buckets and turn over his shoulder. And in the first half, it felt like his decision-making was a little slow when he turned his back. It felt like it got quicker. The processing was more effective in the second half, and that led to, a real scoring explosion from him, which BYU needed, because Richie Saunders, who has been an incredibly steady hand, struggled all night. Richie, he ended up 2 for 11, 0 for 7 from 3. And watching warmups, this is a kid who wasn't missing. So, we know he could shoot the 3 ball, but not yesterday. So AJ had to will the team, put him on his back. He ended up shooting 10 free throws throughout the game, hit 9 of them, only took 2 threes. So, we still want to see the 3-point volume increase, but he got to his spots on the floor. Now, the thing that impressed me the most, and the thing that I wanted to see from AJ, was, what does the playmaking look like? in scenarios like this. If you're such an excellent scorer, the big challenge, especially when we're talking about you as a top-level prospect, is does your scoring impact winning? And oftentimes, if you're a big-time scorer, your efficiency, that goes into it, but it's also of how you leverage that playmaking ability to make all of your teammates better. And that's what AJ did last night. He finished with 6 assists to only 3 turnovers. And the 6 assists, I don't even think did him justice to how well I thought he was reading the game. I thought he was doing a good job in the first half of reading the game. And then in the second half, we started seeing him make plays, not just out of the post where, he could back you down and he's tall and he can see over the defense, and he was making, excellent passes across the court. He was showing off a lot of his offhand passing, which if you go to the No Ceilings NBA YouTube channel and you go to my preseason AJ scouting video, you'll note that I highlighted he's pretty good at passing with his offhand. And we saw a lot of that yesterday. But he started running ball screens against Clemson in the second half. And he had a couple of lobs to Keita that were really impressive. I mean, the touch, the accuracy, it helps when you got a guy who can go up and get it. But that's the kind of stuff that I really like seeing as an evolution of his game. And it's something that if he's going to be in the conversation with some of these other guys, which we'll get into in segment 2, that we really want to see. Now, AJ is averaging 3 assists on the year. He had 5 assists in his last game. So maybe this is something that is going to be a trend with him. I mean, he's got 11 assists to 5 turnovers in his last 2 games. So if we could see this over a larger sample size, that is really intriguing, because now it goes from just a guy who everyone says is, DeMar DeRozan / RJ Barrett. And now we start getting into the conversation of like, well, this is why people said that maybe there's a little bit of, a T-Mac in there, because, McGrady, while he was an effortless scorer, he was also just a jumbo initiator kind of before that was a thing. Obviously we had people that like Magic who had kind of set the path for that, but T-Mac, it felt like he had like the wing wiggle, and but his playmaking, I thought, was always the separator for these T-Mac comparisons. But if he can combine that scoring and that playmaking, man, I mean, that's scary. Now, the other concern is it has been his kind of stock generation, and he didn't have a single steal or a single block yesterday. That's been 2 out of his last 3 games. He hasn't had a single block or a steal. He did in his last game have 2 blocks and 2 steals. So there's not a lot of consistency, but I do think that I was impressed by some of the rotations he was making off the ball, sliding over, coming in, tagging as the low man, being in the right spot to be vertical and prevent shots at the rim. So even if, he wasn't generating a ton of stocks, and he did, I think, I don't know if he forced the turnover or Clemson ended up getting the ball back, but he had a nice strip that ended up going out of bounds. So maybe not a steal on the stat sheet, but I thought he was pretty good defensively, and I think he's been good defensively most of the year. He's just like on the ball. Let me clarify. I think he's a good on the ball defender. It's something I think he's pretty versatile there. He could guard a number of positions, but ultimately, he's just somebody who struggles with the kind of off ball stuff. And that's part of why his stock generation for somebody who's as athletic as he is has suffered. But I did think he played a good defensive game, even though he didn't generate stock. So, this is why watching the film along with looking at the stat sheet is important, because you would seem like he didn't make an impact yesterday. You could make that argument if you just looked at the stat sheet, but I did think that he had a lot of really good moments defensively. And, that game in front of a large number of NBA executives who were in the building, I think is going to be on their minds for a long time. I mean, I think this is probably his best game of the year. We saw this is becoming a trend that he's becoming the second half guy who kind of lets the game come to him in the first half, and then he just comes out and goes and takes it in the second half. If he can merge that, we're really talking. But what does this game do for his draft stock with all of those NBA evaluators in the building? We're going to find out next. There's no reason to let big wireless drain your wallet, especially during the holidays. Right now, Mint Mobile is running their best deal of the year. all of their unlimited plans are 50% off. That means you can lock in 3, 6, or even 12 months of unlimited premium wireless for just $15 a month. It's the easiest way to take your overpriced phone bill and give it the full Scrooge treatment. And what makes this even better is how simple Mint makes the switch. No contracts, no nonsense, just real savings and real quality service. Switching to Mint lets you keep your same coverage for a lower price. Setup takes only a few minutes. You can bring your own phone and number without any issues. The service is fast and super reliable, even on the go. It feels good knowing you're not overpaying just to stay connected. Turn your expensive wireless present into a huge wireless savings future by switching to Mint. Shop Mint Unlimited plans at mintmobile.com/LockedOnNBA. That's mintmobile.com/LockedOnNBA. Limited time offer, upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for 12 months. Plan required, $15 a month equivalent. Taxes and fees, initial plan term only. Greater than 35 gigs, may slow when network is busy. Capable device required. Availability, speed, and coverage varies. See mintmobile.com. Thank you for making Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings your first listen of the day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. You already live your team every day. Now, take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings, with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to LockedOnNBADraft.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. Okay, so we broke down his game against Clemson at the Jimmy V Classic in front of all these NBA executives. Is this a needle pusher to have him re-enter the #1 pick race? At least the narrative that we in the media and in the draft Twitterverse help shape. And I think that there's a chance. Now, one singular performance, I don't think does it. Although, with such a large swath of NBA personnel, sometimes that does stick in your mind when you see what at his highest peak, what it could look like. If he continues to string games like this together, where he's not just scoring, but making plays, I think you have to put him back into the conversation as a potential #1 pick. Now, I love Darren Peterson. He's #1 on my personal board. But we haven't really seen and gotten the full DP experience yet. He's looked great in his minutes, but they've been limited. And we know how leg injuries can linger. Cam Boozer has been unbelievable. He's probably going to smash every analytical model that exists. But he has things that you do need to worry about if you're taking him #1 overall. This is a guy who has had some finishing worries. It's not necessarily something I'm super concerned about, but you do have to mention it when you're getting into the nitty-gritty. And so you can look at all of these guys. And with Cam, you could say, hey, is he a #1 option? Not just with the finishing, but can he create his own shot in the last couple of minutes? Like, could he will his team and put them on his back down 20-something like AJ just did and take it home? That's a question you have to ask. When you're talking about a group at the top that's this talented, you have to ask these questions. And so I think you have to put AJ back in this conversation. You don't have to make him the presumed #1 prospect, but I think for a while, DP and Cam were separating themselves in a different tier. And I think ultimately that still could be the case. But I'll tell you, in person, seeing AJ, and I've seen AJ at multiple levels, high school, from a junior on, now seeing him in college on a huge stage, having this huge game. And, you know, it almost feels like burnout sometimes when we talk about him, because we've been talking about him as such a high-level prospect for so long that we forget that at his peak, when he's doing what he did in the second half against Clemson, that is a guy that is every bit worthy of being taken in with the #1 pick. And, you know, every franchise is different. You don't know what they're looking for. we're going to potentially have some wonky teams at the top with some of these NBA trades. And who knows? Maybe they feel like AJ could be their guy. So when you're talking about a guy who is going to average 25 points in the league, like very likely to average 25 points in the league, who, while has kind of played with tunnel vision at times, certainly, and I've been guilty of accusing him of that, but he's always had, he's never been super turnover prone in comparison. I mean, 3 to 2.2 assist to turnover this year. So like, it's not like he's a negative field guy. This is a guy I think we have to, for all of the things we want to nitpick about him, at 6'9", with his frame and his athleticism, and he showed that athleticism with that monster dunk roaring through the lane, who can create his own shot at all three levels, who embraces physicality and believes he's the best player. I think this game really helped his draft stock. It definitely did in my mind, as somebody who definitely toyed and had him teetering in the tier with Caleb Wilson and Michael Brown. And I adore that both of those players, and Kingston Flemings has thrown his name into the mix now. So we can't ignore him, in the No Ceilings War Room. So if you're a No Ceilings Plus subscriber and you want access to the No Ceilings War Room, you can watch how early we discussed Kingston Flemings in our mock draft that is out today, Wednesday, December 10th. So there's a lot of guys who are entering, and throwing their hats in the ring. And I think AJ was kind of like, you know what? You guys think that those guys are on my level. Let me go to Madison Square Garden and show you why those guys I'm leaving in the dust. And you need to, put some respect on my name and start mentioning me with Cam Boozer and Darren Peterson. So AJ Dybantsa back in the conversation, folks. Not saying he's going to top boards, but he needs to be back in the conversation. But he is not the only prospect that played. There was a second game, Florida versus UConn, the defending champs versus the two-time champs. So both teams have interesting prospects. So we're going to break those dudes down after the break. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Gametime app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Gametime, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. You pull up the app, and the layout makes it so simple to scroll through matchups and compare seat views, pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for fine print. Prices include fees up front, which I love. No last-second surprises at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go, Gametime. All right, so let's get to Florida versus UConn. The big name prospects in this game are Braylon Mullins out of UConn and Thomas Haugh from Florida. Both guys are being projected in or around the lottery for No Ceilings and a number of other outlets. I want to start with the Florida guys. Thomas Haugh was quiet. He had a very quiet first half. I think he had 2 or 4 points. He finished with 18. Seeing it up close, he is a little bit stiff at times, although sometimes you see the fluidity. He had this beautiful kind of like rim run where he caught a pass in stride and immediately spun off for a layup that was like super smooth. But the stiffness really comes out when he's trying to create for himself. He doesn't have any side-to-side wiggle. It's very north-south. And so if you can stay in front of him he's strong. And if you could body him up, it kind of junks him up and gets him a little bit out of control. But he hit some big outside shots. I thought the shot looked pretty good. I mean, his first shot in the first half, it didn't touch the rim, and not in a good way. It hit the side of it was from like straight on, and it hit like the left side of the backboard. So the shooting is definitely going to be inconsistent, but his size is impressive physically. He made hustle plays. He didn't have his best game, but he still managed to put up 18 points and play solid defense. Other guys on Florida, Alex Condon also had a pretty tough first half, but he was really, really good in the second half. Now, in the first half, he did have a lot of really slick playmaking flashes, and you see that quick processing and why that's interesting and how that fits the direction of the modern NBA. And I thought that he looked a lot better when he was playing next to Micah Hanglaughton. He was kind of getting to play like the 4 in a role where the ball was, can move a little bit quicker in actions like that. He ended up with 3 blocks. He had a couple of really nice shot blocks protecting the rim. So first half was really bad, but I thought he was pretty good in the second half and kind of salvaged his game. And, he's been a guy who hasn't been lighting the world on fire this year. But ultimately he has been solid. And sometimes if you don't make an improvement when you go back to school necessarily, and you're just solid, it could tend to hurt your draft stock, but maybe it shouldn't. Maybe he's just a guy who is in that kind of back end of the first round conversation, and he is what he is, but that is what he is, could be a valuable kind of bench piece at the next level. The guard play, Xavier Lee was definitely better than he has been this season. He still had moments where he struggled, especially near the rim. I mean, he was creating paint touches, and, I feel like he's been, getting into the paint and hitting guys with those slick drop-offs pretty consistently this year. But he had some issues finishing. I saw him as a sophomore at Princeton, and I was like, you know what? He's got a pretty good frame. I like his burst. He's so much fun. He's got this energy. But ultimately, his body kind of looks the same, and he hasn't really gotten better. So he was pretty good yesterday comparatively. Like, Boogie Flans had another stinker, and I mean, Boogie's going to be a guy and who's going to need more time in college. I think he just doesn't have good touch around the rim. And if he's not going to be an elite shooter off the bounce for all his aesthetically pleasing shot creation, the ball's got to go in. Xavier, he had 20 points 2 games ago. Then he followed that up with a 1 for 10. And then, he had a solid game last night in front of, a local crowd who was there to support him. So that was good to see. And I still kind of think there's a path for him, just, maybe not a realistic one, but, I still think he plays with a fun energy. Maybe I don't know if he's definitely going to get drafted this year, but there's an outcome for him. I still think, and he was pretty good yesterday. From the UConn side, we mentioned Braylon Mullins as the top guy. He's still kind of getting into the back of the swing of things. This is the second time I've seen him live in the last couple of weeks. And, he looked more comfortable than he did in game 1, but he definitely wasn't at his peak. I think there's so many shot creators on this team that we're not going to get to see him play a ton with the ball in his hands. And that's okay. But we want to see him start knocking down the outside shot consistently. And that hasn't happened yet. He's looked really good in the mid-range, really good coming off movement and using that movement to kind of leverage his gravity and distract guys and cause chaos in that, movement-based UConn system. But he hasn't done anything extraordinary yet. And ultimately, because of how many guys they have, and we'll see what his role looks like, I think he comes out this year. But if he wants to be a lottery pick, I don't know if he's a lock for that. And if he thinks he can get there by returning to school, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility. Even though I know that NBA teams really, really dig his game, and, he would definitely get drafted. So, we'll see how the rest of his season and stay patient with him. Terrace Reed was solid. He's another guy. He's still recovering from a high ankle sprain. So, he's not moving at 100%, but you saw the physicality. And I think one of the things that's going to be underrated about Terrace is that I think he's going to be a big screen assist guy. He sets monster screens, man. When he hits you, you feel it. He is just a strong, big body. So while, he can, set a screen and then tend to, operate in the post, he does some other things that are more modern than what his game could look like when they are getting him the ball on the block. Eric Ryba continues to impress me. I think he's a guy that, I've said I want to see return to school, be the number one big man on UConn and, get his body stronger and just dominate next year. But if he continues to kind of show these flashes, I think he could test the waters and potentially be a first round pick. So he's just really big and he's pretty skilled and he's got good touch around the hoop. He could stretch the floor and knock down outside shots. He could protect the rim. He's definitely interesting. Not a for sure this year guy, but interesting. Alex Caravan had a really solid game. I mean, the guy is solid. He is who he is at this point. If you like him, you like him. If you don't, you don't. I've called him the dad Nikes of this NBA draft. They're comfy. They're maybe not so stylish. You know what you're getting out of them. Solo Ball, another guy who continues to impress, puts a lot of pressure on teams. He's got fans. So he's a name to keep out for this year because when he gets hot, he gets hot. And then, you have guys like Malachi Smith who are interesting. Jalen Stewart, there's a deep Silas Demery, there's a deep bench there of prospects on this UConn team who you could talk yourself into, situations in which they're NBA contributors down the line. But ultimately, the two main guys for the 2026 class that you're interested in were Haugh, Braylon Mullins. Neither one had their best effort, but we're both solid. And, it was really a game of inconsistency. And, ultimately, Florida had a chance at the end. They forced a turnover down 3 and then got themselves a 5-second violation. And, that was the game. So it was a good game, highly contested. The environment really switched. I talked earlier, the BYU environment was a little rough early because it wasn't like there wasn't a ton of people in the stands for the early game. But for the UConn-Florida game, there was a lot of fans. The energy was high. And it ended up being a great game. So thank you guys for tuning in today to Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings. We'll be back tomorrow with the Tylers. So make sure you subscribe and follow Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings so you get all the latest episodes. Make sure to follow us on all socials at No Ceilings NBA. You can follow me at Corey Tulaba. And did Locked On NBA Draft with No Ceilings make your Spotify Wrapped? Well, prove it on social media to secure a free month of our brand new Everydayer Club. Just tag our National Podcast Network account on any social platform, and we will drop you a code. Be one of the first to join the Everydayer Club to get your favorite show ad-free and exclusive access to the members-only Discord channel. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Make sure you make your second listen of the day, NBA Game Night on Locked On NBA. Check back in tomorrow. Thank you for rocking with us. We're out. Peace.